This episode is proudly supported by Pepe Sayer Australian Cultured Butter.
At Pepe Sayer, we focus on quality. So if someone comes into your restaurant and they see you're using Pepe Sayer, they know immediately that that is a quality product you've got in front of you on the table. And that comes from a decade of just doing quality butter day after day.
For more information, go to pepesayer.com.au.
We started with nothing, and so everything that we have has been worked for, but I still remind myself how hard I worked back then. People think that you're brash and you're cocky and you're super confident, but I just know my shit.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. I usually do a long, laborious intro, but I really don't know how to intro you other than saying, hello, Gordon Ramsay.
Mate, I don't need an intro. I'm grateful to be where I am today, and also to sort of break bread with you in person, that's all.
Well, it's good to get you on the show and have you in Australia. You actually have some strange connections to Australia. You're Chef Patron Matt Abay at Restaurant Gordon Ramsay. He's Australian, although he's got a bit of an English accent these days. You've filmed Uncharted here, and you've been filming Food Stars as well. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, no, I fell in love with Australia years ago, and so there's sort of an amazing melting pot of food here that's untapped, and so I love coming to these kind of countries that's not governed by a Michelin guide or a particular way that these chefs need to be shoehorned into. So there's so much more freedom here. That's the bit that excites me. So yeah, glad to be back. Food Stars was about unearthing sort of food and drink businesses that are unheard of, from the indigenous tea from the Northern Territory to a groundbreaking moment with an amazing farmer in her mid-50s that have gone up against the conglomerates to, beat fresh eggs longer than a 6-week shelf life. These things are 6 months. And how do you get an egg staying fresh for 6 months? She smoked the fucking thing. So pretty innovative, creative, and then going up alongside Janine Ellis. Yeah, that's she's insane.
Doing these sort of shows, you do so many. Do you find inspiration in and discover new things when you're doing these sort of shows?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think like any show, I take this shit very seriously. I had to explain to the contestants at the beginning of this journey, at 27, opening Aubergine, I didn't have a pot to piss in, and I had to take a part-time job developing food for fucking Marks and Spencer. I was paid 25 grand a year from Marks and Spencer. That was literally £5,000 a year more than I was earning at Aubergine.
Wow.
To sustain that. And so $250,000 going into your business is fucking huge. So with or without all these cameras and your mics and your makeup, I'm the real guy. So I take this shit seriously.
This year you're celebrating 25 years of Restaurant Gordon Ramsay. How do you reflect on that?
It makes me incredibly proud when I see the sort of, the Claire Smiths and the Matt Abbays of this world. These guys are powerhouses. They'd never had that opportunity had I not been as generous with my sort of, my home, my life, my restaurant. So I still had to convince my wife to sell our 2-bedroom apartment, to get the deposit, to get the bank to give us money. So I took a big risk. But I'm done with this bullshit, with if you're running a 3-star Michelin, then you got to be cooking the food. That's pants. If you went to Hugo Boss tonight for a fitting to get a brand new suit, you're not going to ask the fucking lady to Hugo stitch this. And if you're ever fortunate enough to buy a Ferrari, you're not going to ask if fucking Enzo put the engine in. You're buying quality, and that's what these 3-star restaurants are. And I butted heads with Marco years ago because Marco threw the towel in and didn't want it, and I took the opposite. Hand back, give it back to the youngsters that deserve it as much as you do. And so Alain Ducasse has 3-star Michelin. Do you think there's any customer across those 3 restaurants every fucking night that say, Monsieur, bonsoir, is Big Al in the kitchen? Fucking do me a favor. How smart is he, by the way, to have 3-star restaurants and not cooking any of them? And so stop bitching about the jealousy that you should be behind the stove. The essence is to ignite your DNA in these individuals and give them the freedom they thought they'd never could have. Yeah. and become the most unselfish fucker on the planet, because you can't get higher. So once you get there, get others to stand alongside you. And that's why that restaurant's been running for 25 years. So I love going behind the line, and I love trying to convince Matt and Claire and Kim my way of thinking, but I don't tell them what to do. Yeah. They're fucking rock stars because of the freedom I gave them.
You mentioned your DNA, the culinary DNA, and
yes.
You were renowned for bringing a lighter touch to British cuisine.
Yes.
Take us back to that. How did you find, your voice on the plate? What were the steps that you went through to discover that?
Yeah, that's a good question. With Shannon Bennett the other night and Matt Moran, and we were talking about, the sort of heavyweight scenario in the UK with the Marcos and the Nikos and the Pierre Kaufmans and the Gavroche and Lauterland with John Burton Race, etc. And these guys were fucking powerhouses. Having got schooled brilliantly from Marco and Albert, I sensed early that Marco had never been to France. And so if I was ever going to leapfrog, and competition's there to be beat, right? I'm there to be beat. I love that. I need to do something different than this little sort of powerhouse foundation in London that never really went outside of the UK. Yeah. So going into Paris, I begged Albert if I can get into Guy Savoy. And Guy Savoy was this incredible, prolific chef that was sort of, everything was lighter. He was a prolific pastry chef that had elevated into that savoury world, but he was at the 2-star level. And so the best move is always when these chefs are going from 2 to 3, because they think there's another, set of drums they need to play when you get to 3-star. Yeah. The secret of becoming, a 3-star is becoming the fucking best 2-star. The secret of becoming, a 2-star is becoming the best 1-star. There's no set category. You just have to be the best within in order, and then you hit that ceiling. So I realized that Marco had never been to France, and so if I was ever going to come back and compete, on his manor, in his fucking back garden, then I had to come back with something different. So I did. And I went to Guy Savoy and then on to Robuchon. And so coming back at 27, and it was Marco who set up the aubergine deal for me. Yeah. But I realized I was on something unique when Guy Savoy taught me this amazing creme brulee, and it was done with UHT milk because it had a higher fat content, so it's set. And Albert Roux said, "You never turn a fucking creme brulee out of its mold. No such thing. Don't be so fucking stupid." And then Guy showed me, and it was about this creme brulee setting in the fridge with a skin that you could turn it out with this skin and then put it onto the bowl and then blowtorch, and it sort of melted underneath. Then we had these apple chips and this frozen Granny Smith apple that got turned into this jus Granny Smith. So I put that on my menu at Aubergine, and of course, within hours of it being on there, Mark was asking for the recipe. So my best friend was his pastry chef, and lo and behold, after every service, on a Friday or Saturday night, we used to go over to the Oak Room and sit with Marco, and lo and behold, my fucking desserts are on his menu. So I used to laugh. And then the other kick in the bollocks was 6 months later, they were featured in his book. So I knew then this is one dish. So then I said, right, hold on to this stuff. You've got something different to what he's been doing for the last 10 years. And how do you jump on the same platform of what these guys are doing? So I paced myself then. Then I used to sort of get the long weekends of bank holidays and fly to places like Annecy, and Marc Verrat was just coming on the scenes, and this was this incredible genius in Haute-Savoie that was cooking wild but sort of revolutionizing classics into the modern touch, and that was a huge inspiration. El Boulet had just opened in a little place called Rosace, and I remember going there and taking Heston Blumenthal, and we were blown away. But you don't get it the first time you eat there. You got to go back again a year later to sort of let it resonate, and it percolates, and all of a sudden the penny drops. Fuck, I get it. And so all these things were happening, and that's how I sort of separated myself from the competition and bounced up, to 3 stars within 2 years of opening.
You mentioned a little bit earlier about sacrifice and creating Restaurant Gordon Ramsay. This year, you're celebrating it with an amazing book that will come out shortly. Tell us about that sacrifice. I mean, people see the incredible success that you have, but the beginnings of Restaurant Gordon Ramsay 25 years ago, it was difficult for you to get it up and running.
Yeah, it's laser visioned. It was, you dial it in, you become the most selfish bastard on the planet because you just want utter perfection. And then once you've sort of crafted that level of perfection, then you set the tone, you set the bar, and you come from that sort of innovation backed up creative world, and all of a sudden you have to be a conductor, and then you're no longer in the orchestra, you're conducting, but then you're conducting like no other. And I don't mean fucking Boiling Point was conducting, that was a fucking shit show. I was incredibly vulnerable. And then when you see the results, and you see the good and the bad, you start editing. And when you're on that journey, you haven't got time to edit, but you need to step back. You need to reflect. And so that DNA bedrock was going back to France, standing in there on my day off, turning artichokes for my chef de partie in order to garner, his respect. And so you try to install those little moments that you've been given, and you're hoping they pick the baton up, and they do. They don't immediately, but they do. But they only come about every 10 years. And it's like a rare vineyard. Yeah. And if it wasn't, then there'll be fucking 253-star Michelin restaurants across the UK. And so you're your Claire's and your Matt's and your Kim's and your Mark Askew's of this world, they're a different breed, man. They are just, they're mini you. They won't say that publicly, but, secretly, they got it.
Well, there's that determination, that fire that you've always had. But back then, when you were aiming for 3 Michelin stars, there's a lot of chefs out there that are aiming, have similar sort of goals now. Tell us about that sort of moment when you moved from 2 to 3, and when you found out and the impact it had on you.
Yeah, the impact was huge. Very few chefs ever sit down and actually eat their food. And if there's one thing I've always done is taught them how to cook first before you eat, because you need to know how to cook it perfectly to eat it properly. Yeah. And so it's the wrong way around. And so people think we fuck around when we blind taste test. We don't. It's a blindfold, and we're identifying textures and flavors. So we went to 3 stars rapidly because there's a lightness and a sort of a prolific flavor profile that was harmony. And that was all about that line. Don't cross that line. And so I always say, still to this day, don't get wrapped up in the foo-foo. It needs to look aesthetically stunning, but it needs to taste better than it looks. And so that's what we garnered quite early on, at food that was sublime, textured, finessed, and 6 or 7 courses without having to feel that one must take to the bed for 3 or 4 days after it. And that's a hard balance. Yeah. I always say, just put yourself in the position of the customer, eat that journey. Don't just take a mouthful, eat the whole fucking thing. And don't make it clumsy. It needs to be cut as slick as you presented it. It needs to disintegrate as beautiful as you put it together. And it's all purposely, done. And so, that moment of following your food, and that leap was quantum for us. I knew we had it in us. And I opened my big mouth, on TV by telling the fucking world that the Michelin were in a year before with some crew, and they're filming from outside like fucking idiots with the cameras to the window, and we had 6 French inspectors. So, the French are stiff enough, but stick a camera in their ass and they fucking wouldn't. So I do regret that, but I look back at it now, and that has just been young, stupid, hungry, focused, and slightly obsessed, which is a healthy thing.
Take us to the moment when you did find out about the 3 Michelin stars.
I remember that like it was last night. That for me, the restaurant emptied out. There was the editor and the UK inspector. John Claude's bringing me back every plate, every napkin. I said, John Claude, for fuck's sake, the only thing you haven't brought me back is the toilet paper when they've been at the bathroom. Stop it. Stop over obsessing. The guide's coming out in a month's time, and it's in print, it's under lock and key. But there's a safety element about what you've done up until then. And let's not forget, you get sort of judged in January what you cooked the year before. And so social media wasn't anywhere near as prevalent as it is now. So we hung on to everything. I remember the dishes, the ravioli, I remember the lamb, I remember the sea bass, I remember the souffle. I And for everything we did that night, we made double, but for multiple tables, because in 3 stars, you shouldn't have issues, you shouldn't have imperfections. After that, they asked for a word, and they wanted to meet me in the bar rather than come through to the kitchen. And so there's that sort of real almost like we were in slow-mo. Everything slowed right down. And I'm looking at the clock, it's 10:20, and the table was booked at 7. 3.5 hours later, no one left in the restaurant, and I go out there and, take my apron off, and then we sit down, and they're talking, and you're asking all the niceties. I'm like, for fuck's sake, tell me. Please don't ask to go. Please don't leave, and then bang, they say, hey, look, in the forthcoming guide, we're so happy to say that you've got 3 stars. And I still get choked up now because it's like the moment in time and everything just stops, everything just stops right there, and it's in person, and then they're shaking your hands and they're hugging you. I'm getting fucking hugged by a Michelin inspector. Are you kidding me? So it was just all slow, and I couldn't hear anything bar their voices. And then, you're like a fucking idiot. I want you to comp the bill. The dinner's on me. No, we're paying. And so I think more than anything, they were just proud to announce that. And when you think about their job, they don't get round the world that often to tell the uniqueness of 3 stars. And they left, and they went running into the kitchen, and I don't know, there's just sort of not just the pressure, but everything made sense. It was a combination of just everything sort of coming together, and it just made absolute, utter perfect sense. And then for 10 days, we had to sit there and sort of keep it as a surprise until the guide was launched. So, incredible. I mean, literally incredible. But John Claude, the team, everyone, it was just a unique moment, and it was like winning the World Cup. And then, of course, a year later, you happen to fucking defend it every year. And we've done that now for 22 years. But that's not me. That's the team. That's your figureheads. And so the reason why it stayed that long, that good, is the ones that have been part of it have gone on and been as successful as me. And there's an insight to cherry-picking talent.
You mentioned the importance of delegation, and that's been the backbone of your success as well. But how do you do that? What's the systems that you put in place? There's heaps of operators out there that want to move from 1 to 2 to 3 to 10 venues, but it's, how do you do that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And do you honestly think that I'm that fucking stupid to tell you that now?
I'm taking notes.
You have to politely go and fuck yourself in a really nice way. And I'll tell those individuals that deserve to know that. And I'm fucked if I'm sharing that with a beard man that looks like Father Christmas at the arse end of nowhere. So no.
That's one of the nicest ways you've referred to me.
No, I love you dearly, but you have to go and fuck yourself. Sorry. And secondly, those that have been patient in the wings, to unveil that now and give it to you because you've got a shit-hot podcast, you really do have to go and fuck yourself.
I think we've got our grab.
Well, I mean, I love you dearly, but I think moments like that are critical to the new wave of talent coming through. And secondly, we're moving. We move forward at a pace, and there's an R&D team that is developing as we speak. And so those are secrets that are shared with very few individuals, and I have every intention of keeping that with them.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is you're probably one of the most recognized people on the planet, not just in the food industry, but just generally on the planet. How do you manage everything that you do, and keep that balance as well? And because, we've caught up quite a few times. The Gordon Ramsay that I know is not necessarily the one we see on Kitchen Nightmares. How do you deal with that public perception, and juggle real life as well? Yeah,
it's a good question. I mean, listen, I think Kitchen Nightmares is a tough, shitty environment. Sometimes it's about fixing the family first before you fix the restaurant. Yeah. And that's the devastating thing about that program. But I can't win either way. There's a huge budget that goes into these businesses. I have a huge team around me that helps create some really exciting ideas. And then when you leave them with the prescription to get their shit together, when they do it, you don't get praise. When they failed, you get blamed. So you're fucked either way. So what I do is go in and tell the truth. And I brutally tell the truth. So there's no ass kissing. You know, it's brutal. But let's not forget, they invite me in. I don't fucking rock up with a camera like I've just booked a table of two and pretended not to film the shithole, and fucking Stuart Little scrambling doing press-ups on his back in the fucking kitchen underneath the fucking stove that clapped out and hasn't worked for 6 fucking months. So I do take these things seriously. So it's hard, isn't it? Because you want them to work, but I think that's the one thing that I get upset with in our business, that unlike medicine or law, anyone can open a restaurant. And so these fucking dinner parties that are hosted in these neighborhoods, when they say, hey, Huck, your food's amazing, you should open a restaurant. And they think that this stupid fucking dinner party is the basis of creating a successful restaurant. It's chalk and cheese. Okay, that's like getting your Sunday morning football team to sit in Pep Guardiola's fucking Man City's team ahead of the Champions League's final and say, let's swap the locals in for, you know, some of this group of Sunday League footballers because they're passionate about football. It is an industry that needs to be understood and worked at every level before you go anywhere near business.
You have so many different sort of arms to what you do with the television side and the books and the restaurants. You know, the last couple of years have been pretty tricky for restaurants, you know, pretty tricky for everyone on the planet. But, you know, there's slim margins in restaurants. So has it changed your approach to kind of what you do with the restaurants or refocus things across?
That's a good question. Has it changed? I think it's, if anything, it's given credit to the traceability. And there was a sort of over-glamorous side before COVID hit that restaurants were getting a little bit carried away. Multiple restaurants were just going menu only. We're going to tell you what you're eating and no choice, but we're going to charge you a fortune. And so those places can take credit in remote locations. But when we're in a cosmopolitan city, you can't dictate to the customer that there's no choice. And very few get away with it. And so there's a level of arrogance that was seeping into the industry that was getting a little bit highfalutin. So I think it's been a welcomed, humble approach now. And when the follow scene came in, it was a godsend. But what it did do was remove the shit. Yeah. And it sort of cleared the decks. And I've never had any issues with, you know, continuous investments and putting money back in to the business, having made money. But it's a tough game. It's a really tough game. The margins are tight. You know, the employment laws are stronger and better than ever before. And that's to the advantage. But I always say to the youngsters today, is it depends how quick you want to learn. And so I remember Marco opening up from 5.5-day week to 6-day week, and it was to generate more money for the new restaurant. And we were fucked already, by the way. And on Saturday morning, we used to come in at 10 o'clock anyway. That was our sleeping. But when he announced he's opening on Saturday morning, there's no sleeping on Saturday. We used to stand just prepping, and we'd stand and literally sort of nod off in the prep. You know, that fucked. And 16 hours a day, 18 hours a day, then was just a given. You did it. Yeah. You just, out of respect, you did it. Gavroche was the same. Gavroche was brutal, but we had weekends off at Gavroche. And so, you know, I look at the hours now and, you know, how they taper and how that mental strength is so important. And so you just got to manage your expectations. And whether it's 8 or 10 hours, it's absolutely down to them. And it's got to be. So, finding that balance, and everyone thinks you've got that balance, but you work for that balance. No one hands it to you on a plate, and so you still need to put it in. And the more you put it in, the more you're going to get out. And it's always interesting when you see clock watchers and they're looking at the time and shit. You know, can I go now? You know, but if you go to a football training ground or an AFL training ground or, you know, a basketball training ground, no one's watching the clock. They're fucking experts and they're driven, and that's exactly the same as it is in the industry. To get to the very top, you need to be focused like a fucking athlete.
How do you maintain that drive? Like what drives you? I mean, you have so many things going on. How do you maintain it, and where do you get that drive from?
I started at 27 when I opened Aubergine, and I had 3 in the kitchen and 4 in the dining room. And then I got asked by the partners to take out a loan to put this rag wall, sort of Mediterranean shit paint colour on the walls to make it look like it was in the south of fucking France. We're in the back of Fulham. And then on the bar, they had a payphone that you had to put pound coins in. Do you have any idea how fucking embarrassed I was for customers to use my phone and then pay? So what I'm trying to say is that I started with nothing.
Yeah.
We started with nothing, and so everything that we have has been worked for, but I still remind myself how hard I worked back then. And you know, people think that you're brash and you're cocky and you're super confident, but I just know my shit. And I've spent 2.5 decades getting to where I am today. That's the difference. And there's no I deserve, there's no I want, there's no entourage. It's just hard work with an amazing team, and you know, I'm on it. I stay in front of it. I stay in front. I was in a Filipino restaurant, Saraya, a couple of nights back.
Yeah, amazing.
Fucking beautiful. And Justin, social media guy, was doing a fucking bone marrow louche where they were blowtorching this fucking bone. It was like something out of the Flintstones. And then they were pouring rum in this thing, and then he was like edging down, and this fucking rum was like flambeing, and his fucking face was getting burnt off. And then I revert back to the activists that stormed my restaurant a couple of months back and were upset about meat eaters. There was a couple that travelled all the way from Singapore to meet their Australian relatives to celebrate their wedding. Wow. And the restaurant got shut down. And so I'm just sort of trying to visualise, you've got every right to feel and show your desires to protest, and I get that. But disrupting so many people's enjoyment is fucking wrong. Yeah. And then I was looking at Justin with his rum bone marrow louche and thinking, fuck, if any vegans or vegetarians are outside this restaurant looking at him, they're going to smash the window to get in and ram that bone where the sun don't shine. And so that's the comparison we've got in the industry. It's so bizarre, but everyone's vying for voices, and social media is this incredible, amazing intrusion, and yet, you know, let businesses function. And I'm 62 minutes into this dinner and food was arriving, and the fucking chef asked for they kicked me off the table because they needed the table back, and I was so happy to get kicked off the table. And then I asked for the bill. No, I need the bill. I need the bill. So they need to understand, I've been in those shoes. I know what it's like to have an empty table and a no-show, and I know how fucking hard it is to make money out of great food, because you don't do it for money. You do it because it's all prolific enjoyment, and there's a cost to pay for that enjoyment. And so I'll never forget that fucking bone marrow louche. I'm thinking about trying that when I get back to London, a bone marrow louche, and they're flambing the fucking rum, and there's like this lava that is just like engulfed, running into his little beautiful jaw. I'm thinking, dude, you're going to go up in flames right now. And so it was beautiful to see. How great was that? Can you imagine?
I want to do one.
No, but in the middle of Mayfair, I'm doing a bone marrow louche, and we're pouring rum inside a fucking
sounds
bone.
Sounds like an Olympic event.
And we're setting fire to it, and there's customers looking around at me like, it was beautiful. I was like a pig in shit. It was just one of those beautiful memories. And I think that's the nice sort of freedom that food has here in Australia. Yeah. That connected to the indigenous movements, and then the sort of power of this nature that is this incredible enhancement that is natural and was here way before Mum, you know, pushed me out. It was incredible.
The last 25 years with Restaurant Gordon Ramsay, amazing. But, you know, your kids have grown up through all of that period of time, and you've built this amazing sort of empire across the globe. Looking back on it, what are you sort of most proud of over those 25 years with the restaurant?
I think the family. You know, everyone thinks that you got kids and they're spoiled. My kids are not fucking spoiled. I have a son who's a Royal Marine Commando that's jumped into a salary of £18,000 a year to become one of the most elite forces in the world. Megan is in the police force, and Holly's into her fashion, and Tilly's studying psychology, and she's constantly banging on about a case study with me. I politely tell her to go and fuck herself again. So I'm incredibly proud. I'm slightly nervous that no one's taken over. I'm sticking Oscar in bed with whisks and fucking wooden spoons coming out of his pajamas, and I'm getting these little sort of teddy bears dressed up in fucking chefs. And hey, here's little Marco Pierre White, and here's a little Jamie Oliver. Here's a little pot smoking Gina D'Acampo. So, I mean, pots and pans.
Yeah, of course.
So I'm incredibly proud of them because they think they're all privileged. And yes, whilst they grew up in one house, and I grew up in 15 fucking houses, and 7 of those were caravans. So I can't be any prouder now to see how independent they've become, and this nepotism and the shit they take about, well, it's easy for you. It's not. It's actually harder because they're creating their own way.
Yeah.
And I'm not funding that. There's no fucking way I'm funding the Royal Marines, and there's no way, I did that course, and these guys were turning up in these fucking white vests, and I thought, this is going to be a fucking doddle. I've done Ironman, I can do this. Well, they beat the shit out of me. Do you know what I mean? I mean, they beat the shit out of me so badly that, I was on my fucking hands and knees. They put me in this sheep dip, and it was about the size of this table, and they get me by the scruff of the neck, and then they fucking take a big deep breath, offload your burger and your weapon, and they shove you under this fucking tunnel. And I remember going down underneath this tunnel, big deep breath, and this fuck grabbed me at the back of my neck, and it was like a rugby tackle from behind, and he fucking stuck me under, and the bastard held me down there for 30 seconds before he let me go. So I'm like, fuck, my head's banging against the concrete. I'm like, shit. And then there's someone else at the front that grabs you and he pulls you out. Well, I thought I was a goner. As I came out, and then you fucking slapped, and then you get on to the next part of the course. So yeah, they let me know there and then just how tough they were. And I think that must have been, a moment in history that is like, no matter who you are, how successful you are, if you're going to come into the Royal Marine Commando Centre and you want to do the course, then we're going to fucking show you how hard we are. And so I've never been so polite about these men in these white string vests with like fucking coffee stains down them. It was funny, but my hat goes out to them. Elite force that just makes me incredibly proud.
You've been in Australia to film Food Stars. What's on the agenda for the next sort of year or so with you?
Every time I do a sort of shiny, glossy thing, and Aria and the pop-up was sort of groundbreaking with Matt Moran and Matt Abbey, that was just fucking beautiful. I have to go to the coalface. So we're off to Galicia, and we're going to be abseiling down a fucking cliff.
Whoa.
Gathering barnacles and pethabes. We're off to cook in Jordan and unearth some incredible food, and then we're sort of doing drift dives for these incredible scallops, a sort of 5 kilometres, 6 kilometres rush of waters in the coast of Ireland. Wow. So when I do the glossy stuff, I need to do the shit end stick, because that just then kicks you back into touch with being back at Harvey's, prepping elite terrain, and on your day off on a Sunday night, you have to catch a cab over to say, take it off press and to fold it properly before Marco comes the next day. So I need that connect. I can't let go of that. I think that's the chef in me, I think. And then we're off. Then it's the boat in the water. And I'm not talking about a fucking 40-meter fucking super yacht. I'm talking about a dinghy. It's a 10-meter rib. It's got 300 horsepower engine, and we go airborne. It'll be bass fishing. It'll be diving. It'll be surfing. Couple of nights overnight camping in the Isles of Scilly, and they're just sat on the water, just peaceful, swimming, catching, fishing, and I've stopped trying to compete with Jack now, trying to beat him. He's like a fucking dolphin. So, whilst I've got size 15 feet and I swim fucking brilliantly, but this guy's just a beast. So I'll pretend to sort of try and keep up with him, but unbeknown to him, I cut corners and sort of, as opposed to going across the sort of estuary, we have a point A, point B, point C, then I'll fucking cut across the middle and sort of just tag behind him and sit on the heels of his feet.
Doing all of these crazy adventures, do you ever sort of get scared or shit yourself in the predicament that you're in? Is there any?
I think the abseiling bit, when you've got sort of, a 200-foot drop and you're sort of swinging, and you've got to get these barnacles quickly before this surge comes back up. You sort of tend to sort of think about the danger, and then you've got to get rid of it. I always say it's a sort of 3-second rule. It comes in, 1, it sits, 2, and 3, it's gone. And so I'm very strong at that. And I think crossing the line at Ironman, Hawaii, and doing a sort of 3.8k swim, 180k bike, and followed by a marathon, and losing 27 pounds, you tolerate acceptance. Your mind just becomes so fucking strong that you're not immune to it. I don't walk around thinking we are immune, but abseiling from a helicopter into the jungles in Guyana onto a fucking bed of sand with giant caiman. Yeah, I had no issues, but you do think about it. Yeah, I suppose you do, but I get my shit together.
Well, you're always pushing the limits. What is it that you love about all these things that you do?
Doing things for the first time, and doing things that I could only have dreamt of, and having access to areas where food's connected, that it's unique. I also love sort of tapping into those corners of the world where we're seeing talent that no one's heard of. Yeah. And then I'm getting schooled. And I don't know whether that's the Scottish in me or whether it's mum that installed that level of work ethic. I just love being schooled. And I don't care who it is, whether 25 or 35 or 55, if they've got something that I haven't got and they know about food, I want to fucking know that. I want to know what they've got, because that's going to make me a better chef. And I don't know where it's going, by the way. I don't ring up Matt and say, hey, I've got this new idea for fucking giant caiman, and we're going to take the tail, marinate it, and stick it in a brioche bun. I don't know where it's going, but somewhere down the line, it will come to fruition somewhere on a menu.
Gordon, as always, absolute pleasure to catch up. You always keep me on my toes. Please keep in touch, and we'll hopefully catch up again soon.
Go and fuck yourself. Thanks, mate.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.